Welcome to Ill-Equipped History, where two best friends tell you about some really cool people. Or, sorry, I just heard a very loud banging noise and it distracted me.
Squirrel.
Squirrel. It was really loud. I was like, what is that? Anyway, I'm Morgan, and this is my co-host, Emily.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I'm really tired, you guys. I sound like someone is like banging on the front door. I was like, ooh.
Don't they know we're recording right now? They can go on.
Excuse me. I need to have like a giant sign above my house that says on air so no one disturbs me.
A giant one.
To the point where like planes in the interstate can see it so they can stop being really loud. I'm sure you guys can hear on some of the recordings where you can hear like in the distance a car like revving really loudly or a plane flying overhead.
Yeah.
Or taking off, and like my entire house will start like rumbling like as a plane is taking off. It's great.
Yeah. You said the plane should stop and you paused there and my brain shut the sentence off and I was like, won't it fall if it just stops?
They will fall. They need
fall.
Forward thrust.
Yeah. Yes. They gotta keep going.
They need the wind beneath my wings.
We're soaring.
Flying.
I will never get over that time that you and I were both not particularly in our correct state of mind for various reasons. And we started texting back and forth about just random things, mostly the lyrics of that song. And then you tried to watch it and your internet was out and you were having a hard go at it. It's my favorite text from, sometimes I look at the screenshots I took just to giggle a little bit.
I had like a binge of all the High School Musical movies like a few months ago or a year ago. I don't know. Time doesn't mean anything to me anymore.
Nah, it's an illusion.
And I had to tell Emily.
Yes.
Because I have my core memory is when we went to Disney World, and every time we went to Soarin' Over California, we would sing Soarin', flying. Every time. In heaven that we can't reach.
Oh my God. And me making us take about 17 million gajillion pictures was a good one.
Yes, because now we have 17 million gajillion pictures to look back on.
Yeah, and at the time, y'all, the smiles are deceiving. They were so tired of my bullshit. They were like, please stop making me take pictures. If I hear the words photo op one more time, I'm going to scream. But it turned out good 15 years later.
You know, it was a really funny memory I just had. We had a friend that didn't go with us. We went, it was a band trip, and we were all in the band, and we had a friend that did not go. She was not in the band. And she saw our pictures on Facebook, and then she would make them into memes, and then like life in Disney World, and then she would take a picture of herself, life at home.
Yeah.
There was one picture we took wearing like a cave thing, and then she took a picture of herself in a dryer.
She was so sad, scrunched up in that little dryer.
I think about those pictures a lot. They're great.
I just think about me getting lost to find the bathroom.
Oh, man. I think it was the only time I've ever yelled at you in my life where, bless your heart, you were like nose deep in a map. Like literally just like looking at the map, and you had missed the turn, and I was trying to get your attention to go down the turn, and you couldn't hear me because there was like 5 million people, and I went, Emily, it's this way!
It's the most hateful you've ever been with me. You were so fed up with me.
I don't think I was feeling too well. At some point I got sick on the trip. I don't know if it was that day or not. I think we were in Animal Kingdom, actually. But I was tired. We had been walking all day, and it was Florida.
It's Florida.
Like, what did I say?
It was May. Yeah. You said Florida. I was just
Oh, okay. I was like, wait, what
confirming.
did
Yeah,
I
it was
say?
Florida. Florida.
I thought you were correcting me, and I was like, I thought I said Florida. I have no
Sorry,
idea
I
what
was
just came out of my mouth.
confirming. I was confirming. I was like, yes, it's Florida.
We're not okay today, guys. Listen, I never know what comes out of my mouth. I know it's in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And since I have like permanent brain damage from COVID, it doesn't always match what comes out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
Which I'm sure you guys hear in the podcast several times. I try to edit out when I can, but it doesn't always work. So I'll just say something that's just not right at all. And as I'm editing, I'm like, well, can't fix that.
Every now and then we're like, hi, it's me again. Sorry, I said that wrong. Proceed. This is the correct answer.
I said the completely wrong person there. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We're not equipped.
We are not equipped.
Per title.
We let you know from the jump what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah. It's not, professional historians here.
No. We do this for fun.
Total funsies.
Well, Emily, are you ready to jump into this episode? I'm really excited to talk about today.
Yeah. Let's do it.
The date is May 17th, 1954. Lawyers for the NAACP have been arguing on behalf of 5 plaintiffs across the United States for almost 2 years. The case? Desegregating public schools. On this day, Chief Justice Earl Warren makes a statement to the American public.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs and other similarly situated for whom the actions have been brought are, by reason of the segregation complained of, deprived of the equal protection of the law guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. On re-argument, the consideration of appropriate relief was necessary, subordinated to the primary question, the constitutionality of segregation in public education. We have now announced that such segregation is a denial of the equal protection of the laws. It is so ordered.
Due to this Supreme Court decision, public schools are federally mandated to integrate white students and children of color. This is a legal battle that has been fought for almost 20 years by a man completely dedicated to equal rights. The decision of Brown versus the Board of Education is credited primarily to one man, Thurgood Marshall, Mr. Civil Rights.
Oh my God. I had no idea she was covering this day. I do want to say, I think the way I said it is so ordered made me sound like a 90s Valley girl. It is so ordered. So sorry.
I did not get that vibe. Okay, I thought you did a really good job reading very legalese.
You gave brain damaged Emily all the big ass words. I was fighting for my life in there.
You did a great job. You really did.
Thanks.
So just so you all know, this is quoted from the actual opinion set forth by Chief Justice Earl Warren. It's not the whole thing. The whole thing is several pages. I just selected little bits that I felt were relevant to get the point across for the skit. I have linked his opinion in the show notes if you want to read it. It's not extremely long, but it's too long to read for a skit. And there's a lot of other things in it that we don't necessarily need to cover.
Right.
But we are talking about one of the pioneers of the civil rights movement before there was a real momentum in the civil rights movement, Thurgood Marshall. An incredible man. Like I said in the skit, his nickname is Mr. Civil Rights. That's how serious he is.
Also, Thurgood is like a badass name.
That wasn't actually his original name. I'll talk about his original name. But Thurgood is the better version of his original name. So to talk about Thurgood Marshall, we do, as always, need to talk about the background. And Emily covered a bit of this in her last episode when we talked about the Loving family. It didn't really happen at the same time. The Loving case was several years after this case and the Brown decision, but it comes from similar roots.
Yeah.
Jim Crow era of the United States, segregation is federally legal due to just a bunch of bullshit going on.
Bunch of bullshit, yeah.
A bit of our story takes place in the Baltimore area, and when the Civil War happened, Baltimore had the highest free black population in the United States, but it became very segregated around the early 1900s, and Thurgood Marshall was born in this era. So before we talk about Thurgood Marshall, there's a very important case that we need to discuss that is going to be brought up several times that I want you all to be aware of. So in 1892, a man named Homer Plessy, who's a black man, refused to give up his seat to a white man on a train in New Orleans, which was mandated by state law at the time.
Okay.
Plessy was arrested and he appealed his arrest, and he stated the separation of black and white train passengers was a violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And for you all who don't know, the 14th Amendment is the amendment in the Constitution that granted equal rights to black citizens. It overturned the institution of slavery in the United States. So in 1896, it made its way to the Supreme Court, where it was ruled 8-1 against Plessy. The only justice who voted against it was Justice John Marshall Harlan. In the Supreme Court, there's always a chief justice that says the opinion of the court.
Right.
And so the chief justice of this Supreme Court was named Henry Billings Brown. I'm going to read from his opinion. I'm sorry.
We're going to get mad, aren't we?
We are.
Okay.
It's pretty bad. Quote, "The object of the 14th Amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the equality of the two races before the law, but in the nature of things it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color or to endorse social, as distinguished from political, equality. If one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States cannot put them upon the same plane."
What the fuck?
This is basically saying, oh, well, yeah, black people are just inferior to the white race, so the Constitution cannot mandate that they're treated equal.
I hate this.
Yeah. So the eventual decision, which I think they thought they were doing something with this, but they weren't. They were just making segregation legal, is the outcome of this lawsuit, which is known as Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. This is what mandated separate but equal legal segregation. So we're going to be referring to this Plessy case a lot because the people in the story use Plessy against itself in very clever ways, and can't wait to tell you how. It's so interesting. I like what they did was just fascinating. Also, just so you all are aware, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, was founded in 1909. And they're also very important to the story. So,
I didn't realize that the NAACP was that old. Wow. Okay.
All right. So now onto the man himself, Thurgood Marshall. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1908 to parents Norma Erica and William Canfield Marshall. He was originally born Thurgood Marshall. Thorougghgood.
What a mouthful.
Yeah. He hated his name. And when he was 6 years old, he got it legally changed to just Thurgood.
How can you do that at 6? But you know what? It was the early 1900s.
It was, and I think he probably made the case to his family, how am I supposed to write this in school? It's 25 letters.
Oh my God. That's funny.
So, just Thurgood now. Another thing I don't really go into detail about it, but it's just interesting to note about his heritage. His great-grandfather was enslaved from Africa. I think he came from the Congo. And his grandfather was also enslaved. So they do have that history in their family. Marshall did grow up in a black neighborhood that also had European immigrants in Baltimore. His father was a waiter on the railroad. He had some like service jobs throughout his life. He was described as, quote, cantankerous. And his mother was a teacher who taught in segregated schools. She was pretty highly educated, and she actually taught at some of the schools that Marshall attended. On his days off, William, his father, would take his sons to court to watch the proceedings in the courtroom. They would like talk about it, and he would encourage his sons to like come up with their own legal arguments to support or defend whatever was going on. They also debated politics together, and he encouraged them to support their arguments with evidence. So he was already kind of getting them into that lawyer brain from a pretty early start. Marshall said that the discussions with his father and brother would, quote, turn violent. He said, quote, I guess we argued 5 out of 7 nights at the dinner table.
5 out of 7. That's so
Poor Norma.
Poor Norma.
Poor Norma. But it wasn't like they would like have like these knockout, drag out fights, but very intense political discussions.
Yeah.
One thing also to note is his family, you know, we've talked about the Jim Crow South. We've talked about this time multiple times in this podcast.
Yeah.
Thurgood Marshall's family was doing pretty okay financially.
Okay.
They were not in poverty. They were kind of like lower middle class. But he attended really good schools. He got a really, really good quality education. When Marshall attended high school, at the time, it was called, quote, Baltimore's Colored High and Training School. It has since been renamed to Frederick Douglass High School.
Okay.
When he was in high school, so one thing I didn't know about Thurgood Marshall, he was kind of a prankster. He had a very good sense of humor. He was very jovial. You wouldn't tell because most of his pictures, he looks very serious, and he was a lawyer. But he just, like when he was in high school, he played pranks all the time. He got in trouble a lot. And as punishment, he was made to read the Constitution.
What a punishment. It helped.
I mean, literally, like, he got to the point where he had memorized the Constitution, and he thought it fascinating. He was extremely captivated by it, and he especially paid attention to Article 3, which is about the judicial government branch and the Bill of Rights for all citizens.
Yeah.
So these punishments kind of, just all of these things are working together to get him to where he's going to be as an adult. But I think it's a very good thing that he had the Constitution memorized. I think that definitely worked.
That does help. Yeah.
So he graduated from high school in 1925, and he went off to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. It's the oldest historically black college or university in the country, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. One of his classmates was Langston Hughes.
What?
Yeah. You know, all famous people knew each other in the old days. Just casually. And while he was at Lincoln University, he joined the first black fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. His first little while at college, he, again, was kind of a troublemaker. He was a little more focused on partying, having a good time.
Who isn't?
It's college. Like, that's part of the experience.
I mean, listen, for y'all lovely nerds who are not like that at the beginning of college, I applaud you for one, because I could never. But, you know what? Good for you guys. And I mean nerds lovingly. Like,
yeah, we're super nerds. We have a history podcast.
Yeah, literally. I legitimately applaud you because I was up to shenanigans the first, bit of college.
Yeah.
Because
me
why
too.
not?
I mean, it's college. It's what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
But he ended up kind of getting in trouble. So he's like, okay, I really gotta focus. So he did. He became a good boy. He joined the debate club. He started getting a lot more involved in social justice, and he actually helped desegregate a local movie theater.
Oh my God, he's on
as
it
an
already
undergrad
in college.
Yep, before he even graduated.
Wow.
So his senior year, he ended up meeting a woman named Vivian Buster Bury. Her nickname is Buster, which I love.
What a name.
They met on a trip, and they ended up getting married on September 4th, 1929.
Cute.
And then he ended up graduating later that year, and then they moved in with his parents.
Okay.
All right. So he's graduated college. Now what? He wants to go to law school. And I came across this little factoid. His mom sold her wedding ring to afford his tuition to law school. Cry.
Oh, my heart.
I know. And this is going to hurt your heart, but for the wrong reasons. So he applied to the University of Maryland to go to law school. Yeah. But it was segregated. And they did not allow black students.
Rude.
So for a little while, for a few months, he ended up going to night school. And then he eventually transferred to the Howard University School of Law, which is another historically black college. And Howard at the time was literally in like a little building in, why didn't I write down where it was? I think it was in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Because Howard had to ride the train back and forth between like Baltimore and DC, and he would like read on the train rides back and forth.
Yes, Washington. I googled it.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
I was like, it's in there, in the area. That's not New York. It's not Pennsylvania. Okay, thank you. So at the time, Howard University was in kind of metamorphosis. It was transferring from a night school to a serious law school with very high standards. Or not just a law school, but we're talking about the law school in this one. Right. And the man that was in charge of Howard Law School was Charles Hamilton Houston. And I'll be talking about him quite a bit in this next section. He was really passionate about fighting for desegregation and going up against Jim Crow laws. Mm-hmm. He was actually working very closely with the NAACP on how to break down these segregation laws. And his focus was dismantling Plessy versus Ferguson. And Houston knew that the fight had to be fought through policy, not really in... He knew it wasn't like something that you could just kind of drum up locally. Like you had to figure out how to get it up to the highest power in the land, basically. And he wanted to train more people in his community to fight this fight. That's why he founded Howard Law School, because he wanted to train black lawyers to fight against segregation. Right. And I watched a PBS documentary. I highly recommend. I'll tell you what it is at the end. But the documentary said at the time, in 1929, there were only 100 black lawyers in the Deep South at the time, in the 1920s.
Holy shit, that's
100.
So little. Wow.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy. So Houston and his colleagues are like, okay, how do we fight Plessy versus Ferguson? What if we use it against itself? Separate but equal? Okay. Provide the exact same standards and quality of education and resources provided to white students to black students, knowing Southern states did not have the money or resources to do so.
Right.
So they're using Plessy like separate but equal. There's no equality going on here.
None. Mm-hmm. Ooh, smart.
And so they knew, because these schools did not have the resources to just build a whole new building and school and all that, they would have to integrate. So they weren't breaking the law. So Thurgood, while he was in school, was also helping with this effort, studying a lot. Houston students were studying the Constitution, its amendments, sociology, and other legal precedents too. Like, they were just really getting deep into this. The documentary said making lawyers social engineers, like literally catapulting for change. Rights are something that you have to fight for. Mm-hmm. They're not something that are just given to you, unfortunately. So like I said earlier, Thurgood would use his long train rides back and forth between school to read and to study. And he was actually, of course, the best student.
Of course.
Of course he was. He actually was offered a job as the part-time librarian.
Okay.
And Houston really took Thurgood Marshall under his wing. Like, he got they just got really, really close. And his senior year, Thurgood was part of an all-black legal team in court.
Wow.
Like, they went to a legitimate courtroom and fought a case. And since he was still a student, he wasn't one of the lawyers or attorneys arguing, but he was there like providing evidence, and he was part of the team. And in 1933, he graduated top of the class.
Of course he did.
So this next section is just his work with Charles Houston after he graduated. Houston was planning a trip to New Orleans, and he wanted to document all the symptoms of inequality against Black citizens on their way down.
Right.
So he invited Thurgood to go with him. They were not prepared for what they saw.
Oh, of how bad it was?
Mm-hmm. The poverty was astounding and incomprehensible.
Wow.
Like Marshall mentioned a time when he saw a young Black child bite into an orange because this child had never seen an orange, didn't know what it was. And he was like, the education here is so poor that this child doesn't even know how to eat an orange.
That's horrendous.
It was really bad. And especially after this trip, Marshall and Houston were like, we have to focus on education.
Yeah.
100%. And the thing that just made it even harder at the time, again, especially in the Deep South, not safe for travel and Black men. And there's a biographer in the documentary I watched named Ron James, and he was talking about how Houston and Marshall would have to like stay at like safe houses. They couldn't sleep in their car. And sometimes like they couldn't stay anywhere more than a day.
Yeah.
Because a lot of towns in the South were known as sundown towns. And if you've never heard of a sundown town, that means you can't stay here after sundown.
That means you're not from the South, because unfortunately growing up, when I was really young, I heard whispers of some of those still unfortunately existing.
Yeah. You could not be a Black person in these towns after sundown because you would be killed.
Yeah.
So it was really dangerous, but they got through it okay, and they did eventually return to Washington. Mm-hmm. In Marshall's early career, he did have the opportunity to go back to school. He was even offered a scholarship to go back to school, but he chose to open his own firm in Baltimore. He was like, I'm ready to get in there.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it. You know what year this is, right? 1933. What's going on at the time? Yeah. The Great Depression. We're in the throes of the Great Depression.
Yeah, I mean, right smack in the... Yeah, I was trying to think of what year that started, but yeah.
Yeah, the 30s, you're right in it. So it was definitely a choice to open up a new practice, no matter what your race was at the time.
Yeah.
In the middle of a depression. So he took whatever legal work he could, even though his passion was social justice, but he did have to pay bills.
Yeah.
But then, like, as he started becoming a little bit more successful, his name started getting out there. He started taking more civil rights cases over more profitable legal cases.
Okay.
While in Baltimore, he started getting involved in cases involving tenancy issues, police brutality, and his clients couldn't always pay, but he would take them anyway gratis.
Wow. And
he kind of started becoming more successful, and people started hearing about him. Like, through word of mouth, people are like, oh, this Thurgood Marshall guy up in Baltimore, he'll help you out if you have a civil case. So around this time, Houston, he moved to New York City, and he became special counsel for the NAACP, and which he became like their lead attorney, essentially. And he, again, was continuing this mission on figuring out how to dismantle the Plessy decision. And he decided to start with graduate or law schools. He felt like these will be the easiest, quote unquote, easiest cases to target, because there's not going to be as many issues as with like a public school, like elementary school. It's just kind of like their way to get their foot in the door. So, and Thurgood Marshall was like, hell yes, I was rejected from my school of choice because I am Black, so I will help.
Yeah.
And they ended up finding a man named Donald Murray, and he had applied to the University of Maryland as well, and was not allowed and got rejected. He made contact with Marshall and Houston, and Murray had received a letter saying they do not accept Black students. like in very clear lettering. And so Marshall's like, all right, here we go. Lawsuit time. It's like super explicit. So on June 17th, 1935, Houston and Marshall worked to get Murray into the University of Maryland Law School. And this was the first really serious attempt to do so from a legal perspective. And their perspective, when like talking with the judge in the court, is saying, hey, we're not asking you to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. We are asking you to enforce Plessy versus Ferguson. However, if you don't have a separate but equal law school for people of color, you have to integrate your students.
Damn.
I know.
Did it work?
They were like, here's all of our evidence. Here's all of our research. They are asking hard-hitting questions. And they asked, when they were in the courtroom, they asked I guess it was like the president of the University of Maryland, is there a law school in the state of Maryland black students can attend? Violation of the law. The judge agreed. And Murray was admitted to the University of Maryland Law School.
Fuck yes. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
So, I mean, they're like, this really just started kickstarting a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And as you can probably tell, Houston and Marshall made a pretty good team. They balanced each other out. Like, Houston was actually very serious, like by the book kind of guy. And like I said earlier, Marshall was like more lively, more jovial, more playful. But they brought that balance to each other.
Right.
And unfortunately, while his name was getting a lot of recognition and his reputation is really good, Marshall's law practice was failing because he was working gratis a lot of the time.
Right.
So Marshall actually reached out to Houston, like after this case, and Houston was like, well, come on up here to New York City, and got him a job at the NAACP. Marshall actually became Houston's assistant special counsel.
Okay.
Because they were moving up. Thurgood and Buster went on up to Harlem, moved up to Harlem.
All right.
It was the first time on their own. They'd been living with his parents this whole time.
Oh, shit.
So they're on their own. So the NAACP was super jazzed about this win for the University of Maryland, or against them.
Yeah.
This case and the NAACP were really legitimizing the strategy of using Houston's like Plessy enforcement to integrate schools. And the NAACP recognized if we want integration in our society, we have to start with education.
Yeah.
So now the work is really starting. How do we take down Jim Crow within the courtroom? Sorry, I'm getting all like pumped up.
I love it. I love it. Keep that energy.
So now Thurgood Marshall is starting to travel the United States. He's going everywhere. And his personal next course of action was addressing pay disparities between black and white teachers in the South, because it was very big discrepancy. Like, white teachers were being paid way more than black teachers. Yeah. And at the time, teachers' salaries were state statutes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And it was all public information, and this disparity was a blatant violation of Plessy versus Ferguson.
Wow.
So he started targeting that, and he actually did a lot of work with pay equality for teachers using all this legal stuff. Yes. And Marshall really worked to expand the NAACP's reach in the South. And one thing that the documentary addressed is that there were some disparities between the black community themselves. Because lighter-skinned people of color typically had office or secretarial jobs, a little bit more privilege, whereas darker-skinned black people typically had more menial labor jobs.
Ugh.
And so that can create some discordance too, but Thurgood really worked to make sure that the entire group felt represented.
Right. And
no matter what your complexion was, you had equal representation, at least to the NAACP. And it seemed to be pretty effective from what I saw. And while this is going on, Houston was working on a Supreme Court case involving a student's admittance to the University of Missouri Law School. Very similar. And so they were doing that for a while, and then after about 4 years, Houston got tired, and he left. He was like, I'm exhausted. So he ended up quitting the NAACP, and I think Marshall became the new head of the legal department because he was the assistant. Now he's a special counsel, and he founded the Legal Defense and Education Fund. Now it's known as the LDF, but it's still a component of the NAACP. He founded it in 1940 by himself.
Wow. Damn.
All right. Next, first Supreme Court victory. Woo. So when he was 32, Thurgood Marshall won his first Supreme Court case, Chambers versus Florida, where he was defending 4 black men who had been coerced into confessing to murder. And he got them all acquitted.
What?
Yeah.
That's awesome. At 32?
32 years old. He was traveling all over the U.S. at this point. He was invited to a lot of towns by church groups needing help with court cases for members in their community. He was traveling 30,000 miles a year at times.
Oh my God.
And he was still trying to be like a present person in his marriage to Buster.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear a lot about like their marriage specifically. It seemed like it was going fine. I didn't really hear about things going on. I think she understood the good fight. Yeah. So the original mission that they had set out on about expanding Plessy through education also started including issues regarding voting, housing issues, transportation, and criminal cases. The criminal cases actually brought a lot more publicity and more money, which allowed funding to go after the more slow burn fights for the education system. So the NAACP was like, hey, go do this murder case because it'll bring more money for us to dedicate towards like research for our education. Legal defense. But these cases were also a lot more high risk because especially when you think about the Deep South, you think about not just the everyday people, but like the sheriff's department and other police forces that are very armed. Ugh. So there was a great danger to his life everywhere that he went, unfortunately. And in towns where he was at the most at risk, he would be snuck in through a very highly armed hearse.
What?
Or through secret coded messages.
What?
It was crazy. And there was even times he would sleep in multiple homes a night. Like he would only spend like a few hours here and he would get up and go to another house and spend a few hours there because there was such great risk to his life.
Oh, and he's still just doing it.
He's winning cases left and right. And even those pay disparity cases, he's winning those too. Like, he's just...
My man's winning.
He's winning.
Winning.
However, states were still dragging their feet on integrating schools.
Of course they were.
The 1940s, his mission became even more widespread. In Texas, there was a black voter disenfranchisement case going on where there was an all-white primary. So basically in Texas, like, if you were black, you couldn't vote.
What?
Mm-hmm. In the primary, at least.
What?
Yeah. So there is a case in 1944 called Smith versus Allwright that went to the Supreme Court, which found that the all-white primaries were unconstitutional.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're unconstitutional.
Yes. This was a landmark legal case, and it actually led to the Voting Rights Act.
Hell yeah.
Being passed. Yeah. And Thurgood Marshall was part of that as well. And he really, especially after the Smith versus Allwright case, he became a hero and a celebrity, even more so than he already was. And during World War II, because, World War II happened as well, he turned his attention to defending black soldiers who were facing discrimination both in and out of the war, making sure that black veterans were getting their pay, making sure they were getting things that were promised to them. And with black veterans coming home, NAACP membership increased as well.
Wow.
And he won another case in 1946 called Morgan versus Virginia, where the Supreme Court, they worked on striking down racial segregation in interstate public transportation, nearly a decade before Rosa Parks.
Wow.
So this is saying that with public transportation going within a state, you can't segregate.
Yeah. Hey, steps. Takes
Absolutely.
steps. Yeah.
All right. So, you know how, like, sometimes we'll be covering a case that seems completely unrelated, and then the state of Tennessee will show up, and we're like, wow, hi, Tennessee.
Yes.
This is a bad one.
Ah, fuck. Okay, hit me with it.
This is the Columbia, Tennessee race riot. So, on February 25th, 1946, veteran James Stevenson and his mother Gladys, they're both black, went to their local store to pick up a radio she had dropped off to get repaired. The clerk, who was white, said he sold a radio, which started an altercation between the clerk and Gladys, an argument. James stepped in, and this altercation became more physical, and the clerk ended up going through the front window. Don't know why or how. I researched this in multiple areas. I did not see if he had tripped and fallen through the glass or if he was like pushed or shoved through the glass. Don't know. Does it really matter? Because regardless of what happened, James and Gladys were both arrested, and they ended up having to pay a $50 fine, which is over $800 today.
Holy shit. Is that each or together?
I don't know.
Okay.
It may have been
fine.
It may have been all together.
Either way, what the hell?
And so, but they were let go because they paid their fine. But later that day, James was arrested again as the clerk's father was pressing charges for attempted murder.
Attempted murder.
Attempted murder. So,
Come on.
James was placed in jail, and then a man named Julius Blair, who's a local black businessman, posted his bond. So I didn't see how much the bond was. But later that evening, a white mob congregated outside of the courthouse. And then there was a black mob that congregated a few blocks down in an area that was called a mink slide, which is the segregated, like, black business area of town.
And what county is this in?
It's in Columbia, Tennessee. So this is...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like an hour away from Nashville.
Okay. Middle Tennessee. Got it.
Yes. So 4 officers were sent to the mink slide to... I didn't see anything about them, like, being violent. They were just there to, like, try to keep things under control.
Yeah.
And things ended up escalating.
Of course.
Ultimately, all 4 officers were shot and wounded.
What?
Mm-hmm. So the Highway Patrol and the Tennessee Safety Commissioner, Lynn Bomar, showed up. And they joined the white mob in surrounding the mink slide. And the patrol started shooting into buildings and started looting stores, illegally searched homes without warrants, and seized all the firearms they could find. That night, over 100 black citizens were arrested without bail or legal representation.
Whoa.
So that's the Columbia, Tennessee race riot incident. So Marshall heard about this, and he wanted to go down to help. But unfortunately, he got really sick, so he couldn't make it all the way down to Columbia to help. But there were 2 Tennessee attorneys named Z. Alexander Luby and Maurice Weaver. They responded. And they were actually... So there were 25 men that ended up going to trial. It was like all big... I have a picture of... It was like a joint trial.
Okay.
There's like a bunch of men sitting in a courtroom.
Yeah.
And Luby and Weaver were able to get almost all 25 defendants acquitted. I think there was like 2 to 3.
Okay.
That were not.
Good odds.
Really. One was found guilty and served jail time. And there were 2 others that were found guilty but were not sentenced. It was kind of weird. And this was with an all-white jury.
Wow.
Yeah. So... With all this going on, Marshall did eventually come down to Columbia to help out with everything. So at one point during their stay, the 3 men were like, we have to go to Nashville because Columbia is not a safe area for us to stay anymore. They were afraid they were going to be killed, literally. A mob literally chased them out of town. And Marshall...
Out of Nashville?
Out of Columbia.
Sorry,
They're
you broke up for a second. I'm trying to catch up. So they needed to go to Nashville.
To escape Columbia.
To escape Columbia because they got chased out. Okay, got it.
Yes.
Got it.
So the sheriffs start following the car and end up pulling them over. And they got Thurgood out of the attorney's car into one of the sheriff's cars. And the sheriff told Luby to go on to Nashville and do not follow them. And they turned around. And Luby, of course, because he's not an idiot, followed the sheriffs. The sheriffs went to the woods towards a river with a drunk white mob waiting for them.
What?
With Thurgood Marshall in the backseat.
What? How terrifying. Oh my God.
Pretty sure they were going to lynch him.
Yeah.
So, but Luby followed, and
he made
a big old fuss and demanded Marshall to not be harmed. So the police were like, fine. This part, it's very disjointed, and I couldn't get like a full narrative of what happened. But I guess what happened is the police were like, fine. So they took Marshall to the local judge, and it's like probably 1 a.m. at this point. And they're like, local judge, arrest this man because he's drunk. Public drunkenness. And the judge was like, this is the most sober man I've ever seen in my life. Leave me alone. And let him go.
Oh my God. What is this? Freaking pre-Battle of Athens? Like,
I mean...
public drunkenness. Like...
Yeah. Yeah. So, the attorneys all got back into Luby's car, and they made it to Nashville without further incident. Thank goodness.
Thank God. Oh my God.
So, and that's not the only encounter Thurgood Marshall had survived. By the 1950s, he had survived a shotgun encounter in Texas, a KKK encounter in Long Island. He literally hid in bushes from a violent mob in Detroit and survived his own lynching.
How?
I don't know. I was trying to find details. This is just mentioned in the documentary, but I couldn't find, unless like when they survived his own lynching referred to the Columbia riot.
Right,
Columbia
maybe.
incident.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't find anything else about like a separate lynching attempt.
Wow.
So yeah, he went through all of that. And he won, at this point in the early 1950s, had won 10 major Supreme Court cases. So in the early 1950s, he's won all these cases. He goes back to his crusade with integrating the school system. He and his colleagues submitted 5 cases to the Supreme Court with what would eventually be known as Brown versus the Board of Education.
Wow.
So we're going to talk about that next.
Okay.
My next section, Brown versus Board of Education. So the road ahead. So this wasn't just one lawsuit that was brought before the Supreme Court. There's actually a lot of things leading up to this I'm going to talk about. Starting in 1936, which was Pearson versus Murray, which we talked about was Murray being admitted to the University of Maryland Law School, their first big integration case. Missouri ex Will Gaines versus Canada. Similar, this is the one that Houston worked on, where Lloyd Gaines was a student at Lincoln University in Missouri. He applied to the University of Missouri Law School, denied because of his race. Missouri gave Gaines the following options. They would either build a black law school because they didn't have one, or they would pay his tuition for law school in another state because they didn't have a law school, and he refused both. And he was allowed to go to the law school. In 1948, Shelley versus Kramer, it ended the legality of racially restrictive covenants and signaled the beginning of the end of legal segregation in housing.
Okay.
Because that was also happening. In 1950, there was Sweat versus Painter. Herman Sweat applied to the University of Texas Law School in 1946. And they did set up an extremely underfunded school for black students. And he got Marshall and the NAACP to sue, because it was just not even comparable. And the Supreme Court agreed that, quote, blatant inequalities between the university's law school, the school for white students, and the hastily erected school for black students were separate but not equal. So he was allowed to go to the University of Texas Law School. So it's the same outcome over and over again, which is great. In 1950, there was McLaurin versus Oklahoma Board of Regents of Higher Education. George McLaurin was a doctoral student at the University of Oklahoma who was required to eat separately from the other students in his class.
No.
He could not eat lunch with his fellow doctoral students. So he filed a lawsuit, partnered with Marshall and the NAACP, stating this was causing an adverse impact on his education, and the Supreme Court agreed.
Yeah.
So these are just a few cases that not all of them went to the Supreme Court, but several of them did. But this is just kind of the precedent to the Brown versus Board case. So, like I mentioned earlier, there were actually 5 lawsuits wrapped up in Brown versus Board of Education, which were Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Briggs versus Elliott, Davis versus Board of Education of Prince Edward County, Virginia, Boiling versus Sharp, and Gebhardt versus Ethel. So in all of these cases, they're all a little bit different, but they had the common theme of state-mandated segregation in public schools constitutional. Mm-hmm. So, and all of these families involved in these court cases had lost in the lower courts and filed appeals to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court consolidated all 5 of these cases under Brown versus Board of Education.
Okay.
So Marshall and the NAACP brought forth evidence that segregation within public schools was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment due to the inherent inequality that comes with segregation. Of course. Right. And they had receipts. They brought in sociologists that were like talking about the inequality and the social aspects and the effects of that. They had evidence of the inequality with these systems. I mean, they did their work. So the case was brought to the Supreme Court in 1952, and the court was not able to come to a decision by June 1953, which was the end of the court's term. So after, they broke, I don't know what it's called, but they were not in assembly. They were on break or whatever. And Chief Justice Fred Vinson died because it's a lifelong appointment. And he was replaced by Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was the governor of California at the time, which, from what we talked about last week and this week, probably a good thing, to be honest. So the Supreme Court reheard the case in 1953 when they reassembled, and Chief Justice Warren was able to get a unanimous decision from the other justices declaring separate but equal was unconstitutional.
I love this man. I really do, because he got unanimous on the Lovings case too. Mm-hmm.
And he was a brand new baby Chief Justice with this case. This is his first major, I think this is probably his first Supreme Court case, was Brown versus Board of Education.
Damn, what a biggin'.
I know, right? And I actually, if you scroll down, I don't know if you've seen it, but I saw this picture and it made me cry. It's a woman, and it looks like her daughter, with a newspaper that says High Court bans segregation in public schools.
Oh.
And the mom just looks so happy. Oh,
yeah.
Cry.
Like she's going to cry. Just
like my baby can go to public school.
You want your kids to have the best education possible.
Yes.
And they weren't even given the opportunity. Like they didn't have a chance at a good education before this.
Yeah.
It's sad.
So on May 14th, 1954, Chief Justice Warren delivered the official court opinion, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place." And 3 days later, on May 17th, 1954, the Supreme Court ordered to desegregate public schools, thanks to Thurgood Marshall and his legal team. Woo!
Woohoo!
So do you think Thurgood Marshall just, rested on his laurels?
You think he's done? Hell no.
Hell no.
Hell no.
I will say, unfortunately, Buster did pass away in 1955. Oh. I saw somewhere it was lung cancer. Oh. So he later married a woman named Cecilia Suyat, who's actually his secretary.
How old was Thurgood?
He was in his 40s. His, later 40s at the time. Because he was born in 1908. So he was, 47, I think.
Yeah, so they were married a long time. That's sad.
Yeah, it was really sad. They were married I think they married in 1929. So like almost 15 or over 15 years.
Oh, she was young.
Yeah, she was really young. So Marshall did go on to marry a woman named Cecilia Suyat. She was his secretary at the NAACP, and they ended up having 2 children together, Thurgood Marshall Jr. and John Marshall.
Oh, they're cute.
I know. And it's so funny to see pictures because she's so tiny and he is so tall.
Yeah. Thurgood is so tall.
He's so tall. And she's like, I think she's a Filipino heritage. So she's just tiny. But they had two sons together and they were married throughout the rest of his life.
Oh.
So, like we said, he did not stop at Brown versus Board of Education. He kept going to court. Another case was in 1956, Browder versus Gale, which ended the practice of segregation on buses and ended the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. And in 1961, Garner versus Louisiana, which ruled that individuals could not be convicted for peaceful sit-ins during dining establishments, eventually leading to the end of discrimination in public accommodations found in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And that's just a few. He had a lot more cases for sure. John F. Kennedy appointed Marshall to the U.S. Court of Appeals.
Hell yeah.
And Lyndon B. Johnson appointed him to Solicitor General in 1965. And Solicitor General basically argues on behalf of the United States in Supreme Court cases. And this is the 3rd highest office in the Justice Department. So pretty high up. And
that is really cool.
Yeah.
That, you're like, I'm representing just literally
the entire
everyone.
U.S. Yeah, the entire U.S. And the United Kingdom and the United Nations asked Marshall to help write Kenya's constitution when it became a liberated country.
What? He's just out here doing shit.
Just doing shit. On October 2nd, 1967, he became the first Black Supreme Court justice.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. And he served until 1991.
Wow.
So some of the things he did while he was on the Supreme Court, he ruled in favor of abortion in Roe versus Wade. He supported immigrant rights. He wanted to limit government influence with illegal search and seizure cases. He advocated against double jeopardy as far as like making sure that it wasn't being violated. I guess like you can't be tried for the same thing after you've been acquitted of it. Advocated for privacy laws. There's actually, I didn't write it down specifically, but there was a case that was brought before the Supreme Court involving like pornography. Mm-hmm. And he was like, basically like, it's no one else's business what you do in private. Like, why are we talking about this? Which is true. I mean, if it's within your own home, it's not hurting anyone else. It's no one else's business. According to Michael Davis and Hunter Clark, who are biographers of Thurgood Marshall, quote, none of Marshall's 98 majority decisions were ever reversed by the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know, it's so crazy. And while I got this from the NAACP website, while on the Supreme Court, quote, Marshall fought for affirmative action for minorities, held strong against the death penalty, and supported of a woman's right to choose if an abortion was appropriate for her. So just on a grand scale, fought for civil rights, fought for individual liberties, fought for everyone.
Yeah.
So, as we know, as time went on, different people were appointed to the Supreme Court. Court over time became more conservative. And as time went on, he became one of the few like liberal voices on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And so he just started to kind of, he didn't want to distance himself, but he wasn't quite as vocal because of that. But he did write 150 dissents to the Supreme Court regarding the death penalty appeals. And in the 1972 case Furman versus Georgia, the death penalty was actually put into de facto moratorium, meaning that it was suspended.
Yeah.
So no more death penalties, because Thurgood Marshall believed the death penalty is unconstitutional, period, bar none. But that decision was later overturned, later on in his tenure. So he did decide to retire in 1991. I don't remember where I saw it because I didn't write it down, but there was one when he announced his decision to retire. Someone asked him why, and he said, "I'm old."
I'm old.
I mean, he was in his 80s at this point. Like he was done.
Let the man rest.
And in 1993, January 24th, 1993, he died at the age of 84 from heart failure.
He worked up until the last 2 years of his life.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. His casket was, quote, laid in state in the Great Hall of the Supreme Court. He was only the second justice to be given this honor.
Wow.
And I mean, hundreds of thousands of people came to visit his casket in the Supreme Court.
Wow.
He won more Supreme Court cases than any other lawyer in U.S. history.
Any of them?
Any. He won 29 out of 32 cases brought before the Supreme Court. And that's not even counting like all the other cases that he fought that were not before the Supreme Court. I didn't even see like a final number because he just was everywhere. I don't know if anyone could actually count how many court cases he was involved in.
Wow.
Whether directly or indirectly, you know. So there was one of his obituaries that read, quote, "We make movies about Malcolm X. We get a holiday to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. But every day we live with the legacy of Justice Thurgood Marshall."
Damn.
I know. In 2017, there was actually a biopic called Marshall, starring Chadwick Boseman as a man himself. And I was looking into this, and this movie is actually about a pretty small criminal case that Marshall represented pretty early in his career. Mm-hmm. It was like a rape accusation case that he was involved in. So it doesn't even talk about like everything else that he did. It's just this case. So some other parts of his legacy. There are multiple buildings and institutions named after Thurgood Marshall. I won't say all of them, but just a few are the Thurgood Marshall College at UC San Diego. There's the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which is a nonprofit for providing scholarships to historically Black colleges and universities. There's the Thurgood Marshall Federal Judiciary Building, which is part of the like Supreme Court agency. Mm-hmm. I think it's just like office buildings. There's the Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Houston, Texas, part of Texas Southern University. Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse in Manhattan, and about at least 7 high schools or academies named after him as well.
Wow.
And if you're interested, the FBI has a bunch of documents about Thurgood Marshall, which I've linked in the show notes, because it just came across my research, and I started reading them, but anytime I start reading like old FBI documents, my brain just kind of glazes over. I wonder if it's like something they put in their web screen where it's like, you will not read any of this. But I'm just
maybe. Yeah, fuck the Freedom of Information Act. You can't read it.
You cannot see. And just not really about Thurgood Marshall, but his wife passed away not too long ago. I think it was with like in 2014 or 2017 is when Cecilia passed away. But his 2 sons are still alive, and they Thurgood Marshall Jr. is an attorney, and John Marshall is a politician. Okay. And I have pictures of them too in the show notes.
Look at them looking all spiffy.
If you look up John Marshall, there's a lot of stuff about how he's the son of Thurgood Marshall, like in his like political pamphlets and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just kind of funny. It's like, I am his son. But they've both been involved in like just politics and law stuff since they were very young.
Yeah.
One of them worked for Bill Clinton for a while. I don't know. But that is the story of Thurgood Marshall, Mr. Civil Rights.
I love it.
Just a super inspiring
dude. Oh my God.
And just a quick disclosure, I have been feeling a lot of feelings over the past month or so. a lot of hopelessness, a lot of just frustration at the state of the world with a lot of things. And researching Mr. Marshall has really kind of given me a sense of hope again. It's made me feel very hopeful that there are always going to be people that fight for what's right, that fight for liberty, that fight for freedom, and making sure that the people who don't have a voice get heard and represented, and they have equal access. And it helped me feel a lot better about everything.
I completely agree. It's like, it's more than just a feel-good story. It's like, it gets in you. Yeah. And you're like, oh, there are people, and you're right, there are always people like that out there. And we need people like that.
It's like Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers. So I'm not going to go into all of my sources because there are several, but I did want to point out there's a PBS documentary I watched that was released in 2014. Really good. It's called Mr. Civil Rights, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP. I found it, I think it was on like Tubi or Freevee or something like that. But I think it's also available on YouTube. It's a really good documentary. It doesn't go a whole lot into his life, but it really talks about his legal work. And it goes into detail about some of the lawsuits and his work with Houston. I got a lot of information about Thurgood Marshall from this documentary and like more of his adult life. So yeah, and then all my other sources will be named. Yep, there we go. Yeah. The end.
This is great. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You know, I, like, in passing knew the name Thurgood Marshall, but just, you know, probably in an 8th grade history class kind of vibe. Like, it just...
mentioned in passing, like, oh, yeah, there's this guy.
Yeah. Here's his picture. He did this, and then you move on.
Right.
And I'm so glad you delved into this.
Me too. He was so fascinating to learn about, because... same, like I've heard his name before. I knew he was involved somehow with like the civil rights movement. And I was like, I think he was involved in Brown versus Board, but I don't know a whole lot about that case or him in general, just like something about public schools and desegregation. That was the extent of my knowledge.
Right.
And I'd actually been kind of going back and forth because we are still in Black History Month. Not that we can only talk about, you know, Black civil rights heroes during Black History Month. But I was like, should we talk about Martin Luther King? Should we talk about Malcolm X? Like, I was really starting to focus on, like, these civil rights leaders. And I was like, maybe I'll just do Thurgood Marshall. I don't know anything about him. Yeah. And I'm so glad I did because, oh, my God, what an incredible person.
Yes. He paved the way for a lot. Just like last week's episode with the Lovings, that paved the way for, like, it just, there's a lot going on in this time for civil rights. And wow, the fight it took is heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time.
It really is. And like, they were so good with their strategy too. Like, it's not something I would have even thought of. Like, making sure the law is being enforced to the highest extent it can be is what got the law overturned. Like,
yeah, genius. You're fighting like fire with fire. You're
really
playing the game with their pieces. Like, it is crazy.
Absolutely. That's a very good way of putting it. Because that's exactly what happened. Yeah. So yeah. As we're going through socials. Yeah, let's do socials. Sorry. No, okay. You're good.
Okay. If you like this, you can find us on Facebook,
Ill-Equipped History Podcast group and page,
Instagram
at Ill-Equipped History,
TikTok
at Ill-Equipped History,
Gmail,
ill-equippedhistory@gmail.com.
And Patreon.
Patreon.com/ill-equippedhistory.
$5 gets you bonus content and stickers.
Woo! We just did an almost 3-hour episode on The Wizard of Oz.
It was so good.
Very, very long, very extensive, thorough history of The Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Didn't think it was that extensive, but it's been around for a long time.
Quite extensive. Morgan really made sure to give me all the heavy parts of that. I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. I thought it was going to be equitable. I'm sorry.
No, we always try to split it up as evenly as possible. And I think this was the first time where one of us dived into the topic, and it's like, this is so much.
It's so much.
Yeah, that's okay. No, it was funny.
Because we don't research it before divvying it up, of course. So it's like, all right, here's the general components that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And then we assign why don't you do this and we'll do this and then we'll split it up this way and blah, blah, blah.
On paper, it looked great.
Yeah. Because we both were covering two things. And then I chose to cover the book and the series, which though there was a lot going on there. But
there was a lot there, yeah.
Emily covered the original movie, which has so much.
I think it was 12 pages of notes just on filming the movie.
Yeah, not even after. Just
yeah.
The actors and the shenanigans that happened and the abuse they endured and the procedures of filming in Technicolor, and Emily did a really good deep dive into everything about the movie.
I was just trying to understand Technicolor. You don't know how many videos I watched just trying to figure out what the hell Technicolor is. And I still don't really know. I have a general idea, but if you were to show me the components, I wouldn't know what's happening. Truly.
Well, you did a good job.
Thanks.
I felt like I understood somewhat from your explanation. So, good job.
Glad. Oh my God. And, we did find out that Toto needed pockets. And if you want to know what that is about, listen to the episode. All right. Well, instead of a silly sign off, how about you just go do some good today?
Yeah. And if you're feeling a certain type of way, reach out to your local politicians and let them know how you feel about things, and maybe do something kind for a stranger.
Yeah. And if you're feeling hateful, have you tried not?
Yeah. Go see someone about that. Go.
Yeah.
What's it? Fix yourself before you wreck yourself, or something like that.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Yeah.
Don't be hateful. There's no need to. What did hate get you? Instead of just feeling like crap all day long.
Exactly. And if you find someone who doesn't look or act or think like you, maybe instead of hating them, go learn something from them and see something from their perspective.
Yeah. And if you don't feel like you can do that, just leave them alone. They don't need to know your thoughts or opinions. Keep it on the inside.
Mama said, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Yeah. She meant it. She meant that. Mm-hmm.
And remember the golden rule. Don't treat others. Treat others the way you want to be treated.
Right. Don't treat others.
I was going don't treat others badly. No, that's not it. Took me a second to remember.
Apparently we need to brush up on the golden rule, because it left me the moment you said golden rule. I was like, wait.
What's the golden
you're right, you got
rule?
It.
Whoever gets the goal gets the rule. Anyway. Yeah, just be kind to your fellow humans and watch the documentary about Thurgood Marshall. It's really good. And read up on some other civil rights leaders.
Absolutely. And we'll see you next week with more Black History Month.
Yay!
Woo!
I'm really excited about the next episode because I don't know anything about it.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Can't wait.
Yay.
Okay, bye.